a plane departs from Dubai to India. This was a routine flight because this plane used to go to Dubai and return to India every day. Everything on the plane was fine, all systems were working properly, and it was reaching its destination safely. However, due to a small mistake or a minor miscalculation, the plane crashes just near its destination. In this accident, 158 people lost their lives. This is the tragic story of Air India Express Flight 812, which shocked everyone. But why did this accident happen? Whose fault was it? And could this disaster have been avoided? Let's find out in this video. Air India Express was a daily round-trip flight, meaning this flight used to fly from Bangalore, India to Dubai and back to Mangalore from Dubai. One such flight, Air India Express Flight 812, landed at Dubai International Airport on May 22, 2010, at around 11:40 p.m. The flight was supposed to return as Express Flight 812, so the airport staff immediately started the necessary checks and refueling process. During this, 160 passengers boarded the plane to return to India. Speaking of the plane, the aircraft used in Express Flight 812 was a Boeing 737-800N, which was a special plane. In fact, it was one of the few planes made by Boeing specifically designed for landing on shorter runways. The plane used in Express Flight 812 had its first flight on December 20, 2007 and was handed over to Air India a month later. So, when this flight took off, the plane was nearly 3 years old. Regarding the flight's pilots and crew, they were the same people who had brought Express Flight 811 from India to Dubai. The captain of this flight was 55-year-old Dyaltko Glusica, who had 10,000 hours of flying experience and 7,500 hours of command experience. Out of these, 24,000 hours were spent flying the Boeing 737. Besides the captain, the first officer was 40-year-old Harvinder Singh Ahluwalia, who had 3,620 hours of flying experience, with 3,319 hours specifically flying the Boeing 737. The plane also had 4 flight attendants, so in total, there were 167 people aboard Express Flight 812. After completing all the formalities at Dubai International Airport, the flight took off at 1:06 a.m. local time and headed toward Mangalore International Airport in India. The takeoff was very smooth, and the plane became stable once it was airborne. For the first hour and 40 minutes of the flight, there was no communication between the captain and the first officer because the captain, due to fatigue, fell asleep right after takeoff. As a result, all necessary radio calls had to be made by the first officer, Harvinder Singh. As the flight continued, by 5:30 a.m., it reached its waypoint, IGM. At this point, the ATC informed the first officer that for landing at Mangalore, they may need to take the ILS-DME ARC approach. For context, the ILS-DME ARC approach is an instrument approach used by pilots to land in low visibility conditions. ILS stands for Instrument Landing System, which uses radio signals to guide the plane precisely towards the runway. DME, or distance measuring equipment, helps the pilot measure the distance. Lastly, the ARC approach means the plane must follow a curved path rather than heading directly to a point, so it can maintain altitude and direction properly. The first officer copied this information from ATC and continued the flight. As they progressed, the flight was now just 77 miles from its destination, Mangalore Airport, when ATC instructed them to reduce their altitude to 7,000 feet. The Mangalore International Airport is built on top of a hill and has 2 tabletop runways. For those who may not know, a tabletop runway refers to one that is built on a high location or hill, with one or both ends dropping off into a deep gorge. Landing on such a runway is very difficult because even a small mistake can cause the plane to veer off the runway and fall into the gorge. Due to this risk, Air India Express had set a rule that only the captain would perform the takeoffs and landings at this airport. However, this time, the captain had handed over full control to his colleague and had fallen asleep. It's important to note that Captain Zlatko Glusi had successfully landed at this airport 16 times before, but the first officer, Harvinder Singh, had never landed there. He had, however, served as the co-pilot on 67 flights to and from this airport. At the time when the first officer began to reduce the altitude of the plane, there was still no communication between him and the captain. At this point, the aircraft was at an altitude of 18,400 feet, and it was just 25 miles from the airport. The Mangalore area controller then instructed the plane to descend to 29,000 feet. The first officer immediately reduced the altitude and began the ILS-DME ARC approach. However, the problem with this flight was that its altitude was much higher than required. At 5:02 a.m., for some unexpected reason, the flight was handed over by the Mangalore area controller to the ATC tower. The tower controller then instructed the plane to follow the ILS-DME ARC approach, which involved turning in a circular pattern at a 240-degree angle from the west to the east, 10 nautical miles from the runway. The first officer immediately copied this message, but at the same time he let out a loud yawn, indicating that he was tired from flying the plane alone and was no longer fully alert. It was at this point that Captain Zlatko realized for the first time that the plane was flying at a higher altitude than normal. At this time, the plane's altitude was 9,000 feet. Upon realizing this, Captain Zlatko quickly extended the landing gear to bring the plane down and also extended the speed brakes to decrease the altitude as much as possible in a short amount of time. At 6:03 a.m., Captain completed the landing checklist and began heading toward the runway to land the plane. At this time, the plane was only 2.5 miles away from the airport, with an altitude of 25,000 feet. The first officer shouted at the captain, pointing out that the altitude was too high. However, the captain ignored him and turned off the autopilot and all other landing assist systems, deciding to manually decrease the plane's altitude as quickly as possible. The first officer suggested that to reduce the altitude, they should make a loop and come back, but the captain was adamant about landing the plane immediately. The co-pilot repeated his suggestion, but the captain remained determined to land the plane at any cost. To ensure they could catch the runway, the captain increased the descent speed to 4,000 feet per minute. At this point, the plane's Enhanced Ground Proximity Warning System, EGPWS, repeatedly gave a sink rate pull-up warning. This warning meant the plane was descending too rapidly and needed to be halted to avoid crashing into the ground. However, the captain did not pay attention to this warning. Meanwhile, the ATC tower asked if the pilots had established the ILS approach. Although the captain had turned off all assist systems, he still insisted that the first officer tell the ATC tower that they were proceeding as planned. The tower controller then cleared the plane for landing. However, the reality was that the plane's altitude was still too high for a safe landing. Ignoring the warnings from the EGPWS and the first officer's suggestion to loop back, the captain continued bringing the plane closer to the runway. Due to the excessive altitude, the plane touched down far beyond the intended point on the runway, about 4,200 feet past the thrust hold. As a result, only 2,800 feet of runway remained for the plane to stop, and its speed was much higher than normal. As soon as the captain touched down, he activated the thrust reverser. However, seeing that the plane's speed did not decrease, just 6 seconds after applying the brakes, the captain attempted to lift the plane back into the air. By then, it was too late. The plane continued beyond the runway and crossed a 60-meter strip and a 90-meter safety area. However, it went past both of these and crashed into a deep ravine. The rescue team arrived at the scene and rescue operations began. Out of the 167 people on board, only 8 survived. Teams from the Airport Authority of India, DGCA, and Boeing arrived at the accident site and an investigation started. The NTSB from the United States also assisted in the investigation. Additionally, the Indian government appointed a court of inquiry to thoroughly investigate the incident. It was determined that the accident was caused by the captain's mistake, his insistence on landing, and his failure to take the situation seriously. He ignored his co-pilot and did not pay attention to the EGPWS warnings. The investigation also revealed that, despite having an adequate rest period before the flight, the captain slept for a long time after takeoff. Perhaps this was due to him falling into a sleep inertia, and after waking up, he was unable to make the right decisions. Additionally, the unavailability of the Mangalore Area Control Radar that day also played a crucial role in this accident. This caused a delay in issuing the message to reduce the plane's altitude. However, it would not be entirely accurate to blame this single factor for the accident. Now we leave it to you to comment and tell us whose fault you think it was. Do you think the accident could have been avoided if the captain had listened to his co-pilot? That's all for this video. We will meet again soon with another interesting story. Until then, goodbye and take care.